And welcome to John Michael and Dr. Kelli Palfy. So pleased to have you here today and so looking forward to this discussion. John Michael, I will turn it over to you to get us started. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you so much for this platform. And I am a girl fan a little bit. I am so excited to be sitting here talking to Dr. Kelly Palfy. You, to me, I'm a huge fan. I've been following you since your groundbreaking book, and it really resonated with me and gave me the strength to move forward with what I do in my life and advocating. I know that I've reached out to you several times. You've helped with a lot of articles with me and gave me quotes. And I'm just so proud to be able to have you share your voice and your expertise to people who are here to listen and for everybody else who wants to listen to the recording. But so please welcome Dr. Kelly Palfy.
Thank you, John Michael. And I appreciate what you're doing too, because if I don't have the support of the listeners and if I don't have an audience, I might as well not be writing. So, and gathering an audience is not necessarily my forte. So thank you for what you do.
My pleasure. I mean, there is so much about you, not just about what you're doing now, but what you have done in the past and where you have come from and the experiences that you've had that have led you here. So today I would like us to try to explore that and share with people your journey. And I love the fact that all your writing, and I'm going to talk about this a lot today, and everything that you do, there's always hope. You
Mhm.
have this, no matter what you're talking about, it could be the most serious, traumatic, something, whatever, you always had this underlying hope. We all can
Thanks.
get through this, or you can get through it. So I just want to make sure that everyone hears that, and I hope that they're able to hear the hope today. How many times can I say hope? Oh, anyway. How did your experience as a Royal Canadian Mounted Police, an RCMP officer, help you want to help sexual abuse victims?
Well, John Michael, if I may, I'd like to go back a little earlier than those days because it kind of paints the whole picture. So, I was raised in an environment. My sister used to pick on me. I probably blocked my mother. I remember just I felt I was rejected by her. I felt rejected by her in my early youth, and I made the decision to reject her. So, I mean, she didn't do anything like terrible or anything like that. Just life stress, right? So, I guess it left me with this just sort of awareness that life isn't always fair and that women can be pretty nasty, right? And again, I'm not trying to speak ill of my mother. Her and I made peace and everything before she passed, and we had a great adult relationship. But in my youth, it wasn't great. I was probably, very rebellious, right from early young age, even though I was a sweetheart as a kid. Anyways, then I got into my first career and I started working in corrections. And because I did want to be a police lady. Specifically, I wanted to be a criminal profiler. When Silence of the Lambs came out, Jodie Foster, I wanted to be her. So that was my ultimate goal. So I started, when I was attending college, university, I got a job working in corrections in Lethbridge, Alberta. And I remember seeing a disproportionate number of men in prison. And because I'd grown up in that environment, getting picked on by my sister and whatnot, I honestly never understood why there was more men in prison than women. I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. And I never got that question answered. Fast forward a few years, I get into my career in policing. I made it into the RCMP. I worked my way I got seconded to assist in the startup of the RCMP's first Integrated Child Sexual Exploitation Unit. So this is back in 2003. Like the RCMP didn't have an ICE unit until our little unit started up. So they were like, we all had to get training. We were developing the training for other people, and we were getting guest speakers in to talk to us, to teach us about this subject. And so at a training seminar in Ontario, in Ottawa, at our headquarters, they had managed to get Sheldon Kennedy, former pro hockey player, come and speak to us. And I'm telling you, he got it in front of us. It was like probably, 20 of us. I always say seasoned sex crimes investigators. And he was shaking. Like at the time, I was going through my own crap, but he was shaking. And I was like, he said, I can't believe I'm standing here in a room full of cops. And he meant it. So I thought, man, for this guy to do this, he's got something really important to share. So I was paying, like, he had my full attention. So he talked about his abuse, which was by his coach, Graham James. As if your audience isn't familiar with him, he played for the Boston Bruins, Chicago team, and the Calgary Flames, I believe. So anyways, he talked about the fact that he'd been abused by his coach almost from day one. He was 15 when it started. He talked about the reasons he didn't report his abuse. And it just blew my mind. Like he had very valid reasons, and my heart just went out to him. Reasons, John Michael, that I'm sure you can relate to. He said he knew he had the talent and he knew his coach had the means to get him to where he wanted to go. He had also been raised in poverty, and his new athletic career was literally helping to lift his family out of poverty. His whole little small town of, I think it was Russell, Winnipeg, Manitoba. Sorry, Russell, Manitoba, I think he was from. He said everybody there was so proud of him. I might be superimposing his story with Theo Fleury, so sorry if I did that. But everybody was super, super proud of him. And he also felt like some of his teammates parents knew that he was being abused and did nothing. And I just was like shocked at that. Like it broke my heart. And I always say God just turned the lights on. It was like I was able to see this is probably why there's so many boys or men in prison, right? Like, because he talked about the fact that he had turned to addictions to deal with this. Like he developed a cocaine habit. And I was just blown away. It was like the lights just went on. I started to see, this is why there's so many men in prison, right? And I was like, I remember it literally broke my heart. He talked about living this double life. And at the time, I was going through my own bullying in the Mounties, and he said, on one hand, I was this pro hockey player, and on the other hand, I was a victim, right? And I related to that because in myself, I was at the peak of my own career. I was in major crimes. That was my freaking dream job. And yet I was being bullied by my supervisors. And it was just, I mean, I was a cop with a badge and a gun. He was a 15-year-old boy away from home for the first time, right? So I felt like that small piece of it, I understood, I related to that. And I remember feeling like so helpless. Like there's like I just remember recognizing that there's no space for men in society to be victims. I mean, you have to remember this was back in 2003. We were literally seizing video evidence that boys were being abused, like in the unit. Professionally, I would have to review these videos and images, but we were not getting any. Like we looked in our systems, we had zero reports of male sexual abuse. So I was like, well, why are these guys not reporting this? And I was like heartbroken for them and wanting to do more, but yet completely consumed with the files that we already had with children, right? So I would say fast forward a few years, I was kind of forced out of my career because of the health issues that I developed, PTSD and a bunch of other things because of the bullying that I went through. But thank God I was already started my master's degree. And I would say I just decided to stay in school and hope for the best, hoped I'd like it. But one day my professor started talking about how he worked at the BC Society for Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse. And it was like a light went on, and um, I knew I could make a difference. I thought, well, with my awareness, with my background, with my, um, you know, credentials, with the opportunity to do research, I could research why boys and men are not reporting, and I could make a difference. So selfishly, it's what brought me out of my own clinical depression was this idea that I could be useful and an advocate for boys and men someday. So that is the long, short story of how I got involved with this work.
I love it. And I love the fact that you made that parallel with the hockey player, the professional hockey player in your life, which is what really propelled you into exploring the possibilities of what you could do. That
Yeah.
simple question is why are there so many men in prison is something that we never ask. No one asks that question. We just assume that that's what it is. But I also just love the fact that I think sometimes as survivors, we forget that other people may go through experiences that are as traumatic as ours. Go ahead.
Totally. And of course, not all male survivors wind up in prison. It was just an explanation for what I was seeing, right? Like, yeah,
Putting the pieces together of that puzzle for you to understand so that you could go forward. That's what's so incredible about that. And the fact that you were at the top of your game and to be able to see this person and see him for who he was and to be, have that empathy and understand that what his truth is pretty scary. There's this grown major hockey player who was a star shaking in front of you.
yeah,
And I think people forget sometimes the amount of vulnerability that we have to go through by sharing our stories. And the
Absolutely.
fact and the fact that you were able to grab that and take it and run
Well, and
was
the like,
unbelievable.
like when he said other adults knew and did nothing, I was like, "Are you freaking kidding me? Give me their names. Like, I want to go tear their heads off." And sorry, I don't anymore. But
Right,
I
right.
I'm not sure if I shared this with you before, but I recently spoke locally here at a church, and two men came up to me afterwards and said, I can't remember I can't remember what their association was, but they said, yeah, we did know. Like they said, he's right. He wasn't wrong. We knew, and we did nothing. And they were like deeply grieved about that, obviously.
Right,
Like, or
right. And
we did suspect, right? But you
but then
know,
again, it's one thing, to suspect, and then especially at that time period, there was nothing to even compare it to. So, do we want to get involved? And what if we're wrong? I mean, I know a lot of people were worried about, well, I don't want to say anything because what if I'm wrong? And then I just ruined that coach's life, or you know what I mean?
yeah,
And I think that's where we've got to change the narrative on that. And that's what I think you were doing. And I
yeah.
think, Men Too does that.
Thank
And
you.
you do it in such a way that as you're reading through it, and I hope everyone reads this book and please pass it to people as gifts, because it does highlight, yes, it does highlight the internal turmoil that we go through on our own, trying to understand it ourselves before we can even come and get help, like from someone professional like you now, and the amount of steps it takes to get there. So I just want to you opened my mind and you helped me out. And I go back to that book all the time and like, oh, disassociation. I understand what that means now. You know what I mean? And it's amazing. And I love the way that you kind of use your case studies for each little item, what you're talking about. This is what disassociation is. Here's an example of what happened, Bub. And you get the narrator of the survivor to share that story to compare to that. And I think it should be in every psychologist's office, I'm saying,
Thank you.
who's ever dealing with sexual abuse. With that, I want to talk a little bit about grooming, and we're going to be going all over the place, I think, today, because I think that there's so much to touch on. Why is it sometimes hard to understand the grooming process? Because a predator just doesn't go up to a child or an athlete and picks them up in that 5 seconds, it's all done. There's a process. And can you explain a little bit about that?
I want to say it appears like a good counterfeit, right? Like it's a really good counterfeit. And unless you know healthy relationships, unless you know healthy boundaries, unless you know like your own worth and value, you can easily get caught up in that. Even professionals. I've had my mind blown a few times at the people that like one of my favorite pastors just got labeled a pedophile and I was just like blown away. And I do believe it was probably a one-time thing in his 20s, like but still like I would never have guessed that, you know. So my point is that, it's you can't just tell by looking at somebody. You can't. Like even me as a professional with a huge radar for this, yes, sometimes I know, but most times no idea. And it's because it's such a it's like their way of thinking. It's like their whole world, like I'm talking prolific offenders. Prolific offenders' entire world revolves around getting access to potential victims. So they put an incredible amount of effort into succeeding at that goal, unfortunately. And they start with, so there's three layers of grooming. First, they groom themselves, then they groom the people in their targeted rich environment, and then they groom the victim. So they start off grooming themselves in the same way we try to educate ourselves to fit into our careers. They will educate themselves so that they can situate themselves into whatever environment will give them the most access to the age and gender of their preference. They literally plan their life around it. So, I mean, you get somebody that would say go to university so that he can be a high school teacher. That's an honorable goal, but it's also the goal of a pedophile. So, how do you know the difference? Which actually I talk a lot about in my new book. So,
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
and I think that's something that we can't determine because it could be our neighbor, it could be a family member, it could be we don't know. And I do know I read a time that 97% of victims know who the offender is.
Yes.
And
They're
it's higher on that end, and that whole myth about being the white van coming down the street to kidnap your child is really a small number compared to what's happening with the kids who know their teacher, their coach, their babysitter even, it's out there, and it's a matter of trying to figure all that out, and it's crazy. And I also understand that in my case, especially in sports, which is so heightened in itself because it's removed from society,
yes.
and that's where a lot of predators will like to go to because they're protected by the organization. And they could, like we saw with the US gymnastics and, the Penn State, Ohio State, they were all protected by the institutions first, which is what they go ahead.
Yes. So they will establish themselves in these organizations and become the most important person there, right? They'll learn how to coach boys, how to coach men, how to, they'll even if they can't do it themselves, they'll become the best coach. They learn how to motivate young boys of their age and gender or of their age preference, right? Or if it's a female target, they're going after their females. But yeah, so they get themselves into these positions, and as I have talked about in my books, like they'll create alibis. They'll have like five clients that they take to the Olympics and have never touched them. But then they'll pick the one that they want to target and they will offend against them. Whereas these other five, they'll swear up and down that nothing happened, and they're telling the truth because they're the alibis.
Yes, and I'm so glad you shared that because I talk about that and people just look at me and go, "What?" If they're a pedophile, they want to touch everyone. No, they're selective, you
Well,
know?
I would disagree. They probably do want to touch everyone, but they
Oh,
don't because they're protecting themselves, right? So they would probably target the one that likes them the most, the one that has the most potential, the one that has parents that are fighting or parents that are too busy, or the one that has like 12 siblings and they know they need some attention. Anything. Whatever vulnerability they can identify is what they'll exploit, right? So one of the guys I talked about in my book, he was a late bloomer, and the coach probably saw that in the bathroom, and bonds with him on that. Oh, I was a late bloomer too. Don't worry, you're going to be a man, and of course he wants to hear that. Who doesn't, right? Hmm.
right. Right, and it's interesting because I think going back to it with the word grooming, which is getting a really different names all the time and different meanings to it, we have been groomed since the time we were born by the people around us, and I truly believe that the predators rely on that grooming technique, and then they expand on it to get what they need. And going back to the five athletes that may not have been touched, that doesn't mean that that predator wasn't grooming them to figure out that the sixth is the one he can use
Sure,
you
absolutely. Yeah.
know and it doesn't mean that hasn't touched them, but he's checked them all out, and I've seen where the predator will actually go to the most popular athlete because that was his challenge, where
Sure.
everyone thought that the popular one doesn't have a problem, he's not vulnerable, all these kind of things, but no, that was his choice, and we can't figure that out. You
Totally.
were going to add something to that, yeah.
Yes, and they will also test their loyalty. So they'll do things like give you alcohol, give you a cigarette, give you marijuana. This is, back when it was illegal,
Right, right.
or show you pornography, or let you swear, or let you drive a vehicle, anything that your parents won't let you do. And just so that there's a bond of secrecy between you and the offender, right? Because they'd rather get found out for letting you have a beer than sexually assaulting you, right? Oh, I didn't realize I thought there was pop there. I figured he'd take the pop or something like that. Like they'll lie. And like I said, they'd rather get in trouble for giving you a beer than for touching you or sexually assaulting you. So they test their would-be victims and see who can hold that secret bond.
Right,
And
right.
then
And then
they
in my case, my coach used alcohol so that the next morning he couldn't remember anything.
I highly doubt that.
I don't remember what we did last night. Did we have a good time? And throw the questions back onto me to ask me to, for me to tell him what happened.
He's
And I'm
testing.
like, I'm not say that,
Probably didn't drink any alcohol. He was probably faking it. He just gave it to you. He remembers everything that happened. What he's doing is he's planting in your mind that you shouldn't talk about it. And he's
Right,
testing to see how much, if you won't bring it up to him, you won't bring it up to anybody else. And he's planting that idea in your head, like, oh, I have no idea. I didn't do anything wrong. He's also planting the idea that it was consensual.
right, exactly. And that's how I felt. I felt that it was my fault. I must have started it, or it would never have happened. Because he's the adult, he's the power person, and I respected him. So I must have caused this, which created a lot of other things, which
No,
we
but
don't need to sink. I don't do that.
I can use that though. For you to even be alone and in a situation with him tells me that you already had a well-established relationship, that you already felt affection for him, you already
Yes,
trusted him, which is part of the grooming process. They make sure they groom themselves to look the part, they groom their environment so that they're one of the most valuable people and that everybody wants to have their attention, like the coach that can get you to where you want to go has the connections, whether that's with other pedophiles or just legit people, as depends on who
right?
they are, right? But because they do get themselves into positions, they'll hire each other into their positions. It's disgusting.
It's
It's
true.
very
It's
elaborate.
really true. Yeah, all
They're,
completely. And they're all protecting each other. Exactly.
yes,
Now,
yeah.
you were
They
talking
love
about the, oh,
the
go ahead.
lawyers that work for that firm. Ugh, gross. Like it's so elaborate.
Yeah, it is. It is. Now, you were talking about the layers of grooming that predators engage in, and you said that there were three of them. Can you break those down for us?
Right. So they groom themselves to look the part
Right.
of the coach or the professional or the teacher or the police officer, the priest, the whatever's going to give them access to their target rich environment, targets being future victims. And then they groom everybody else in that environment. That includes having a few people of that age group that they won't offend against. They get into that role. They'll make friends with your parents so that when they say, "Hey, can John Michael come to the game with me this weekend? I'll pay for everything," that the parents think they're doing them a favor by giving them a break from their kid for the weekend and getting this rare opportunity to be developed. So they groom themselves, they groom their environment, and then they groom you. I don't know your story about how yours started, but I apologize if you have shared that, John Michael. I just hear a lot of
That's
stories.
I know, no, you did. No, no, it's quite fun because it's also what I call the predatorial grooming trifecta. Is exactly what you're talking about, where they will, groom the institution first and get their backing and their support. Then they groom the parent, as we saw with Nasser, where he would actually abuse those young women in the room with the parents sitting behind him using
Yes.
medical jargons and saying, I need to manipulate this so that we could do it, And he had videos out about talking about what he needed to do and how proud he got to the point that he was so confident that nobody was ever going to believe it, do that. And so when the young girl goes out later and says, Mom, Dad, that felt really weird, that he touched me here, and then the parents, no, 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 no. That is just because it's what he has to do. It's the
Yeah.
medical treatment that you have to go through. So they're defending that predator. And it's interesting is that if the first two aren't in place, they won't go for that child. It's almost like that perfect storm that all the elements have to line up. And if something doesn't line up properly, they're on to the next child, you know?
100%. Goal. It's like I always say, like they put as much effort into their goal as you and I put into our goals, and you know how much you had to train to get to where you got to in your professional career.
And they play against each other as well. Like in my sense, my coach was making me feel like the other team officers were not understanding what I was going through, so that he was the only one that could understand me, which was isolating me too. So that's all incredible with that. I want to talk about why do offenders like to hide in churches, sports, the Boy Scouts, entertainment, the medical fields? Why do they hide there? Why education?
Well, because it's the target rich environment of their age and gender of preference, right? So, and they exploit these arenas where parents are busy. They're looking for places where they can send their boys that their boys will get good mentoring and, survival skills or build their confidence or learn how to do X, Y, or Z, right? And, so they put themselves in this situation. Churches, I mean, because Christians, we're supposed to believe the best in people. We're supposed to forgive. We're supposed to, love everybody beyond what we know about them, right? So, yeah, so they know that and they exploit that.
Yeah, and I also think that they also use the fact for males. I can only speak for males because that's what I am. Um, they do it in a way that it can be hidden as hazing, initiation, or rite of passage. I'm only
Absolutely.
doing this to help you become a man. I
Yes.
mean, we've seen that, and here in Ohio, we saw a substitute teacher abuse three sophomore high school students And the only reason she got caught was that the boys were like comparing their stories at school, and a girlfriend heard overheard it and went to the principal.
Good
So
girl.
she gets caught. She goes into, the trials and everything. But the parents of the boys wrote in defense of her because she helped their sons become men.
Gross. You
And
know what? They
that's our mentality.
to be abused. They were going to become men anyways.
Right, exactly. And it's just so that's how our society thinks sometimes.
One
And
of my high school teachers was apparently sleeping with girls in my high school, and nobody seemed to have an issue with it. And this is why I had such problems with authority. Is like, why does nobody care about this? Like,
And you know that they were talking about it in the teachers' lounge. How did you get to be with Susie last night? Oh my God, the people they talk about it. It's just it's crazy with all of that going on. And I know that the security that they feel that when they are in those type of environments can help them grow as a predator and not get caught and they feel it's secure. They're more worried about that than what they're doing to the child.
yeah,
That's what's so odd about it.
they have zero regard. They actually, I've watched some pedophiles be interviewed, and a lot of them actually think they're doing, well, at least that's, say, sorry, one of the other things in the grooming process is they groom themselves. So right before they offend, they'll have to tell themselves things like, it's for their good. They're going to have to learn about sex anyways. I'm not hurting them. I really love them. It's better with me than some violent offender, like all kinds of crazy ways they justify it to themselves. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And then, sorry, go ahead. I
No, keep going. I think you're onto something. I want to keep it going.
kind of forgot where I was going with it.
I,
I have it in
I
the
like
back.
the fact that they come up with their own not excuses, but ways to I lost the word too to
Themselves. They groom
yeah,
themselves too.
and to
Justify.
say that what I'm doing is okay. I'm not, like you said, I'm not hurting them. I love them, and I think sometimes that they can convince themselves that they do love them.
Oh,
Like
their love is not like the appropriate kind of love. It's
right,
distorted.
right.
It's demonic. Yeah.
I mean, I remember my coach would always tell me, I'm so surprised by this, that I never felt this way towards someone else like you, a boy. I never felt this way about a man. This is my first time too.
But okay, so how old were you when he's calling you a man? He's also implying that it's consensual and that it's your
Right?
fault. It's your
I was
fault.
like
I've never,
14, 15. Yeah.
yeah, this is because of the relationship that we have. That's what he's implying there.
All right, all right. Let's take a little curve here and talk a little bit about secondary traumas. I can't even say it now. Traumatization.
Traumatization.
Trauma. Thank you very much. Where'd the teeth go? Talk about that a little bit, and how does that affect everything in our environment?
Okay, I'm gonna try and tie that in with the one other thing that I kind of wanted to mention a few times, which
Let's go back. Let's go back. Yeah.
I'll tie it all in together. So this idea of willful blindness on the part of other people, like Sheldon Kennedy saying, "I felt like other parents knew," and this guy saying to me, one of the people listening to a lecture 30 years down the road or 40 years down the road, saying, "Yeah, we kind of did know, we kind of suspected." It's something that I talk about in great detail. I do a whole chapter on it in my new book, but just to give your audience like an idea of what I'm talking about, like we call them enablers. They see things, but they convince themselves like, oh, come on, I mustn't have been seeing that. Partially because they're scared to get involved and they have a lot, just like why the victims don't disclose. Enablers also have a lot of really valid reasons for why they don't disclose. None of them are good enough in my mind, but no, I mean, seriously, like things like, I need my job. Like, I'm a single mom. I have two boys at home myself. I need my job. If I report my boss, yeah, I'm going to get fired, and there's no other jobs around. So I have to keep shut. And I'm sure, John Michael's old enough to say something if something was going on, or I'm sure Susie over in accounting can say something, or I'm sure like his parents seem like good people. I'm sure he'd tell them. Like, they justify to themselves. So let's say, for example, they might see the coach or the teacher, in private with John Michael, and John Michael coming out looking really upset. And they'll be like, what the heck just happened there? Like, why is John Michael upset? but then they're flooded with these ideas, and okay, so if that's the case, then the coach or teacher comes out and tells me to mind my own business and reminds me that I need a paycheck by bringing up, how's your boys, how, and basically saying keep your freaking mouth shut or you're going to lose your job. And that's a real
Oh,
fear for me because I am a single mom with two boys, that kind of thing. So yeah, so this idea, we call it willful blindness, where we see something but then we, our brains, either we choose to be silent because we're afraid, or we choose to be silent because we've convinced ourselves that, oh, I must have been seeing things. I'm sure it was something else. And since the coach just told me it's because he gave you heck for your bad mark on your math exam, that's why John Michael was so upset. It's not because, even though I saw him coming out, pulling up his pants and wiping tears from his eyes, I'm sure I didn't see that. So yeah, so that whole idea of why people who see things choose not to get involved. Then you asked about secondary traumatization. So, secondary traumatization is like a victim tries to come forward. And well, for example, in my Men Too book, I talk about one of my participants who I named Aaron. He didn't want to tell his mom and dad what had happened because they really liked his basketball coach. So he decides to go tell the school counselor, who in the end turned out to be a fellow pedophile, who, they got a job working at the same school and set themselves up. So he goes and discloses to the counselor, who tells him that he's forgiven for what he did. Basically saying, well, that's your fault, but don't worry, God forgives you. And tells him never to talk about it again to anybody else.
I'm
So that
speechless on
is
that.
a really good example of a secondary traumatization where he went to somebody in authority for help and he got blamed for it. Or another one of my participants went and disclosed to his therapist, and his therapist blew him off, said, well, all cousins do sex play, like all cousins do this or something like that. And, meanwhile, there's a huge age difference. One was a perpetrator and one was a victim, and just didn't told him, I'm not even going to talk to you about that, right? Like, so that secondary traumatization is basically when you reach out to someone for help and instead of helping, they make it worse. And sometimes that can be more harmful to the child than the actual abuse themselves. So
Yeah,
this,
I
like
agree.
in that, yeah, like a child goes to the parent and says, Mommy, Daddy did this to me, or Uncle did this to me, and Mom says, don't lie, or Mom says, I doubt it, or whatever, right? Then the kid's like, oh, I never dreamt my mom would respond that way.
Right, right. I realized and remember as you were talking, things were coming back in my head is that my parents would invite the predators to our house to have dinner. And I would
Yeah.
have to sit across the table from them eating. Or they would like have this incredible, like the coach would be there, the lawyer would be there, whoever it was. And they were always charming with my parents. And my parents, like you said, became very good friends with them. I mean, they were there for holidays. They were there,
It,
it just,
it guarantees his access to you. It
hmm,
leaves open access to you, and it also sends the message that your parents aren't going to believe me. Look at, they like me, right? You can see how much they like me.
it's going to be my word against yours. So who are they going to believe? I'm the
Yes.
adult.
Yeah.
So,
And they often will target the child who's already got a reputation for lying.
yep,
You told a lie then, you must be lying again.
yep, yep, yep. Oh, wow.
Sorry, that must have been really awful.
Ah, we let it go. We let it go right now. But thank you for letting me share that. And as we're going through this, I want to talk about, and I'm going to pull this up. You also have other books that I want to make sure we hit on, you know, and I'm a huge fan of Unfriend Her.
Okay, I got a copy
And
right here.
there's a series of them that you have, what is it? Oh, there it is. Oh my God, everybody. This is just incredible because you actually, the dialogue sounds like that teenager and going in through that experience instead of sounding like a professional expert, talking from way up here down. We're in the grounds with her. We understand what she's going through. We want to be liked at that party. We want to make sure that we get to go and all these things. And yet we get to discover as she is discovering,
Mhm.
and it's really odd as an adult reading it. I know, well, hey, there's that sign, but I get so caught up in the story and the artwork that I'm like, oh my God, I'm right back to where I was at that time, you know? And it wasn't like we made bad choices. It's just that This is what was presented to us, but we're going to beat ourselves up over it, because we allowed ourselves to be in that situation. But talk about how you did. Oh, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Sorry, it's hard not wearing either my cop hat or my therapist hat here. So
I
my
love it.
therapist
I love it.
jump in and say, I always tell my clients, don't judge yourself then as if you knew what you know now. So don't judge yourself. Don't look at young John Michael and say, how come you were so how could you be so stupid? You didn't know what you know now. You didn't know that
Right.
then.
But how many times, and like, I'm going through a court case with Ohio State University now, and how many times am I asked those questions? You should have known back there. Why did you allow it to happen?
Because I was 15 or
Did you
whatever.
like it? Did you like it? Did you want it? I've had that asked to me every time my case is brought back up. You must have wanted it or you wouldn't have stayed there. Why didn't you fight back?
I wanted my career. I didn't, because
Exactly.
I believed the lie that it was consensual.
And I don't think people understand that there are so many other layers that are going on at that time for that teenager. You
I
know,
always say this is why we have laws, because kids don't know what's good for them and what's bad for them, right? Kids would love to get in the pickup truck and drive to the West Edmonton Mall or Disneyland and go to Disneyland, but there's a really good chance they wouldn't do very well driving.
right, right, right. That's perfect. That's perfect. So I want to talk about your series here, creating personal safety series. How did you come up with it? Where did you? I know you have a co-writer or the artist, or you have a co-writer and an artist. How did you all come together to create this incredible series?
Okay, so I met Dr. Wanda Polson-Holman just on LinkedIn, and we kind of discovered we were from the same city and just got together and we had same visions. She's the head of, it's called Little Warriors. It's an inpatient treatment facility for children who've been abused. And so we just, we've kind of been friends over the years and just decided, we wanted to do more. We wanted to combine our skill sets, shall you say? Like she does therapy with children and I work in the area of protecting and preventing. So we just collaborated and kind of came up with these three book ideas. There's still a couple more on the back burner we'd like to do, but and then we did have one graphic artist for our first book, but we didn't kind of feel like she was stepping up to meet our vision for what we had for the third book. So we ended up going with another guy and he was amazing. So yeah, that's my favorite book out of all of them too. But just to give the context, so the Creating Personal Safety series is meant to be a way to help parents. Parents are always like, what do we say to our kids and when? And how do you tell your kids about this? So we just wanted to give parents the language to be able to educate their children in a way that's not going to be traumatizing, but yet also gets the message across. So the first book is called The Unsafe Neighbor, and it basically tells the story of the concept behind it would be that not everybody who mom and dad think are safe or who start off as safe, stay safe kind of thing. So it's a coworker of dad's. He gets himself in that position to meet little children by raising puppy dogs and having them run around in the yard. And then, he lives right by the school. So all the kids are always at the fence looking at the puppy dogs, right? And hires this one to help with the puppy dogs. And because dad knows him and because other kids in town have worked for him, dad allows him to get hired. And then, as time goes on, so one of the things with the grooming stage process is that it can often, as you probably know, can go on for years. So, he could have been working for this fella for a year before he ever offended against him. So the whole concept would be they establish the relationship and then they kind of work towards getting him alone and increasing their just
Trust.
yeah, increasing their trust, but also like suggesting sexual content, sort of like pornography laying around. I think in that book there's like a stick figure of a pornographic magazine, right? Like just meant to get the concept of out there without anything graphic being in the book. And gets him away to a cabin, and then it shows just the offender with his hand inside the little boy's sleeping bag, and then he goes home and tells his dad. And it's meant to say like if this happens, this is what you need to tell your dad. So, and I always say it has a happy ending. Before the abuse, dad and mom had said, no, you can't get the puppy. But since the offender goes away to jail, puppy needs a home too, and mom and dad cave and get him the puppy. So it's a good story that has a happy ending, and it's just meant to educate children that, even though we thought daddy's coworker was safe, turns out he wasn't. And thank you for telling us, and we dealt with it appropriately, and you get rewarded for doing that.
Right, and I think that's the brilliance of the books is that you don't dictate or lecture how parents should talk. It's almost like you give them ideas so it could become theirs. This
Totally.
is what
Yeah.
worked for here, and then you could try this, and it's a gentle urging. Talk to your
Right.
children, talk to your children, and I think that's the most powerful message. Besides the fact that there's in all of them, in all your work, is that hope.
Mhm.
Even in Men Too, by the time you get to the end of the book, you're seeing progress of all these survivors that you're working with. And you're
Good.
seeing this arc
There,
that's happening for them.
there is hope. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and so the next book is called Positively Me, and it's a little girl's experience of going to therapy. And it's just meant to relay the message that if this does happen, there is professional help, and you don't have to be scared. These are the kinds of things you might do in therapy, like learn how to relax and breathe and talk about stuff. And then the final book, The Unfriend Her, is targeting the pre-teens, early teens, and it's just meant to give a gentle warning about how somebody can accidentally get caught up in the human trafficking. So the story is, young girl is best friends with the girl that's 1 year older than her, and when they get to junior high and high school, they're going to separate schools. The younger one's now lonely, and she winds up having to be friends with a mean girl in school or whatever, and because there's nobody else to hang out, and she's flattered that this mean girl suddenly wants to be her friend. And as soon as she gets over to their house, oh, my brother is in university and him and his friends are taking photography and they're going to pay us to be their models. Isn't this exciting? And that's how I afford all these wonderful clothes, and you can have them too. Don't you want to look wonderful like me? And she reluctantly agrees to get some pictures taken. And and then it gets more explicit. And so again, she winds up going back to her best friends and asking for her best friend's help because her best friend's dad's a police officer. So we get him involved. And again, it ends on a good note. Like, it's not like there's a little bit of like, okay, this is how it happens, and you can see that there's awkwardness on her face, and he's handing her this little outfit to put on. She's like, that's not mine. No, thank you.
Right.
So
No, that's great. That's great. That's awesome. And I love again that positive affirmation towards the end. You know, that by saying something and by doing something, you could help other people. And you make the young people in all the books become heroes. Do you know what I'm saying? They become heroes and they're able to express what they felt uncomfortable about, and people believe them. And I think that's so powerful. And I think a lot of people don't feel that they're being heard or believed. And by reading these books, even as an adult, I felt this incredible urge of I'm heard and I'm seen.
good. Well, and John Michael, you probably know how much courage it takes to come forward. So they are heroes in my mind.
Yeah, definitely. They definitely are. And which once brings me to this point when I want to ask you, what words describe you the best and why?
Ah, well, I thought about this, and I consider myself a front runner, like somebody who's going out saying, hey, you guys, like especially my new book, like my next book, it's in press right now. It's with the publishing company. It's going to be called Speaking the Truth in Love: A Mother's Guide to Keeping Her Son Safe. Because, the narrative is typically around female victims, and it kind of leaves a message that boys aren't victims too. So I'm like, I just like feel like my role is to shine light in this area that's not talked about enough. So I stick to my wheelhouse, and this is what I'm writing on. And yeah, so a front runner, advocating for boys and men, and then the second word would be daughter. And to me, that's like because I didn't talk about it much here, but I was a pretty broken woman. Like when I went through my own bullying, I lost my career to bullying. I had PTSD. I developed a bunch of other health issues, and I always, I always say I used to be the most angry, bitter, resentful, defensive, just insecure person that I knew. And I got in touch with my faith, my Christian faith, and I don't feel like that anymore. I don't feel like I have to walk around judging people. I actually like myself. It was one of the first things I ever prayed about. God, if you're real, help me like myself, like, and I just feel like I've had such a, I mean, no, I mean, just had such a transformation, like, and so I consider myself a daughter of the King, and yeah,
Fantastic.
my favorite, yeah.
Wow. And that just triggers, and I don't want to use the word trigger there, but that just got me into thinking about there are so many survivors who right now are angry with God
Absolutely.
because of what they've gone through. What can you share with them, or how can you like guide them in using your therapist side of how
And
like we need to change that?
that's a really, really hard question, and it is something that I attempted to speak to in my first book in Men Too, because I heard that a lot. Like, I'm never going to believe in God because how could he let this happen? And I mean, the only way that I can make sense of that is like, we're all God's children, including the offenders. God's not pleased with what they're doing. It's not his desire that you would ever be abused, but he created hell, and that's a really horrible place to go. And why doesn't he just take offenders out in the first instance? It's because he wants them to repent too. He wants them to say, I'm sorry, and not spend eternity in hell. That's my opinion, my belief about that. Like, and it's not his desire that anybody's abused. And, I mean, like, there's a biblical principle that even the most horrible things that ever happened to you, yes, God did quote unquote allow that. He didn't want that, but he didn't prevent that. But God's promise to us is that he will use those. He will somehow transform that horrible, horrible, horrible experience into something that he will use for your good. So like in your case, John Michael, you are being a hero. You are helping other men come forward. You are advocating for other pro athletes to be able to speak up. You are being a light for other people. And again, it's not that he would have ever wanted your abuse to have happened, but same with me. He didn't want me to go through the bullying and stuff like that. But in my situation, for example, all like I don't think I had a very good upbringing, right? But yet I was able to use, because of him, all of those horrible, awful experiences to put into words that can help you get healing, right? And you know what? That brings me a lot of joy. Hearing you say that my book helped you step up, like wow, like I always say God used my misery to become my ministry, right? And that's the only way I can make sense of that.
I love it. I love it. And I think the only other thing that I need to talk about or ask about is that word forgiveness.
That's
Because I think a lot of time in talking and working with a lot of survivors, there's that reluctancy about that because in our minds, we think that if I forgive them, then I'm allowing them to do what they had done to me or to other people. And I think it has to be something other than that. What do you think
yeah,
about that?
yeah, absolutely. And I'm literally taking a course on this right now myself to understand it better because it is such a hard concept. And first off, like biblical teaching would say that forgiveness is it's not forgetting your abuse, it's not minimizing the harm, it's not justifying. It's basically saying, I'm turning this person over to you, God, you deal with them. I'm Forgiveness in the Christian perspective is meant to set you free because John Michael, there's nothing that you could ever do to your offender that's ever going to make you feel better enough. It's never going to satiate that pain. So God says, let me take that, let me deal with him, let me heal you. Because if you keep trying, if you don't do that, you walk around with this pile of garbage that you're carrying around and he doesn't want you to have to do that. It's to set you free, right? Like it's like again, it's not forgetting, it's not reconciling necessarily, it's not denying, it's not minimizing, it's none of those things. It's saying, okay, I'm choosing to allow you to deal with that person, and I'm choosing it to do it your way, and I'm opening my heart to your healing.
That's
If that makes
amazing. That's amazing.
It's really
As a
hard concept.
certified, right, right. And as a certified self-talk trainer and coach, I found my power when I was told that the event happened. There's nothing we can do about it. We can't change that. But we can change the way we think about ourselves.
Yes.
And a lot of survivors create false stories about themselves just to get through the day, just to succeed and survive the day actually. And if we can start to realize that those old programs that we put in our head over and over and over again are not ours, exactly, and
Yeah.
that we could find our truth. And I think that's just amazing.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I believe it was Bessel van der Kolk that said he's a trauma psychiatrist and very well respected and renowned in the field. He said the worst, like basically our worst problem comes from the lies we tell ourselves.
Oh
So
yeah, oh yeah.
true.
And we repeatedly tell ourselves. And that's the thing that's kind of sad. But there's always hope. There's always hope. You can change anything we put in our heads. If we can change the way we talk to ourselves and change and construct those sentences, we can have a different life. We really can. And that's what's
Absolutely.
exciting about everything. And that's basically kind of what I got out of your book with Men Too, was that I can change this by shedding light on myself and understanding and acknowledging it and looking at it. And I think that's one of the things that's really encouraging for people who do share their story, who come up forward, or who share themselves with researchers, so that researchers can find and develop even more. Because the more of us that share our story, the more we're going to be able to see the different varieties that are out there, because we're not all the same, you know? And I'm so grateful for all of the Me Too movements and all the US gymnastics girls who came up forward, and because I don't think we would be here
Mhm.
talking about men if that didn't happen.
Yeah,
But I also think that we can't treat men the way we treat women in the healing process. I
absolutely.
think it, we can generalize it at the beginning, but eventually they have to go in a little bit of a separate way.
Because of gender stereotypes in society, it is a different experience for boys and men because for physiological, biological reasons, it's different for boys and men. Like, the role expectations that yeah, it's very different for boys and men. And that was my whole goal in writing Men Too, Unspoken Truths About Male Sexual Abuse, was to help boys and men. Well, I wouldn't recommend anybody under the age of 16 or 18 read my book probably, but because it does contain some graphic content. But it was I mean, that can be a parent's decision, but it was meant to help male survivors make sense of what's gone on for them, to help them organize their own thoughts, and yeah, just get freedom from those lies that they might be telling themselves.
Exactly. And you do a good job of putting that out there, that, certain people shouldn't look at this or read this. And I mean, even in your series, you have like the parents and caregivers how to use this book, and information sheets, things to keep in mind as a caregiver, the myths in child sexual abuse, all these things, and safe places to exercise. You just give everybody this. And that's like right in the very beginning. So you said,
So,
here it is.
yeah.
You got to create this safe space for this child to be able to share with you. And here's the thing that's so ironic. As a predator creates a trusting place with their victims, parents need to create a safety environment with their child. And they
Absolutely.
need to hear them and believe them and really allow them to express what's going on. And they may do it in different ways. And I think what we have, our society has a hard time, is that they want a list of A, B, C, D, E, F, G. This is what happens, and this is the order that it happens if your child is being abused.
Mhm.
And there's no way to do that.
No, but I do think a lot of parents don't understand the grooming process. So that is something that so I literally just wrote a whole book about what we've just been talking about, like my Speaking the Truth in Love book. It's starts with a whole chapter just on grooming. I think the next chapter is on why boys and men aren't talking about it from their own personal perspective. Then the next chapter, if I remember correctly, is about like the societal reasons why boys and men aren't talking about it. Then I go into enablers, I think, and what to do what warning signs, what to do, how to have those tough conversations, and how to support your boys afterwards.
I love it. I love it. And I think that the way you do it and the way you write, I haven't read that one yet, but I'm
It's not,
sure that you,
it's
Ooh, I
probably
can't wait.
January. It's with TBN right now, publishing
Oh, I
company.
can't wait to, I can't wait to read. But I think it's also the way that you write it, and even in Men Too, and even the series that you've got out right now, you do it in such a way that it allows the reader to figure it out themselves too. You may say, this is what you need to look for, la da 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 da, but you also allow them to add their own perspective to it and allow them to participate. It's kind of like I feel like when I'm reading your books, I'm participating.
Yeah.
I'm active within this situation. And that is what is so powerful to me about those. So, where can people find your books? Where can people find you? Can they reach out to you if they need to? Because I know there are a lot of men that would love to reach out to you and could
Mhm.
help.
Okay, well, first off, just so you know, I'm only allowed to work with men who live in Alberta just because of my licensing, unfortunately. But I have a website, kellipalfy.com. All of my books are available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Chapters, Walmart, wherever you buy books. Some of those places don't actually carry my books in the store, but if you go on their website and look, they're there. So wherever you buy your books, they're it's the distribution companies that can make it available. So if you go to Barnes and Noble and it's not on the shelf, if you go to if it's like Chapters, you can go in there and write the name of the book that you want, and it'll pop up that it is an option. They can order it in, but probably the easiest would be Amazon.
Right. So before we have to leave, because this went so fast. Oh my God, I can't believe I just looked at the clock and I went, no,
I
there's
kept
so
thinking
much
I was
more.
going to get nervous, and we're almost done.
I know it. I know it. What is something that you want to share that we may not have spoken about?
Mm. I honestly just want to reiterate what you said, that there is hope, there is healing, like you don't have to stay silent. It's not your fault. Like, you have a voice. Come get help. Talk to John Michael Lander, join his group, like there is support. There's enough of us out there that get it now and that see it. And I'm very grateful for the people like you and the Sheldon Kennedys that have been a voice for boys and men. I'm very grateful for men like you. But yeah, basically that there are supports, and there are a lot of people who get it. You're not alone. It's not your fault. You didn't deserve this, and that there is
Well, first
healing.
of all, I am so honored that I was in the same sentence with Sheldon Kennedy. Thank you so much. I know that's crazy, but
Oh,
I want to ask this one other question before we leave. What would you share with parents or
mm.
allies of someone? What can you do to encourage them to move forward in helping their loved one who has been abused?
Well, oh, okay, added those words. I'm going to change that a tiny bit. I want to say,
Please.
what would you do with a boy, for example, can't reach? Your son's suddenly pushing you away, or you suspect you've seen like a significant character change or personality change. Like, my advice, that's what my whole book is directed towards. Like, don't minimize what you're seeing. Don't do that willful blindness thing where you push it away and say, "Oh, it can't be that. It wouldn't be that. It shouldn't be that." I know Uncle Sam would never do that. Don't, ask those tough questions. That would be what I'd say. If you're Ask those tough questions, even if it means you lose a friend. You know what? Honestly, I would say, if you were to confront somebody who's not a offender, yeah, sure, they might be a little shocked, but if you were to confront, like, say, a situation, if you're only suspicious that something might have happened, if somebody's not an offender, they got nothing to hide. Come have a look. You can search my house, like, I promise you nothing happened. I'll have a look around for, somebody who was an offender might be more defensive.
Right. And in the long run, it just shows how caring you are, and stuff like that. And miracles are only seen when the light is on. We can't see them in the dark, so we need to, shed light on it today. Well,
Absolutely.
I
And
want to
all of us. It takes all of us, people like you, people like me,
thank you, and I thank you so much for being here and being a part of this. We could go on for another 3 hours. I know we could, and I love talking to you. And so Becky, do you have anything you would like to share with us?
I just want to thank you both for a fantastic conversation. And I've put links to Dr. Palfy's website in the chat, so please check it out. Links to order her books are there. I've also included a link to an online chat-based support group that's offered through 1 in 6, which is now part of Zero Abuse Project. So if you know of a male survivor who could benefit from that resource, please do share that with them. Groups are offered once each weekday. So that site includes information on the times and how to join and all that. But I just want to thank you both so much for a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you both and the work that you do on behalf of all survivors, especially men. Thank you all so very much.
Thanks, Becky. My pleasure. Thanks, John Michael.
Thank you, Kat.